City Skylines is celebrating its 11th anniversary this year. To celebrate it, the developers released 3 brand new packs for the first game. But that raises an interesting question. Do these add-ons really add something new, or are they simply a victory lap? I tried to find out in a nearly 2.5-hour stream in my another channel, Andrew City Live Gaming, where I tested all 3 new releases: Renewed History, Iconic Brutalism, and the Race Day DLC. And now, in this video, I can finally give you a full summary of both the stream and the content itself, because by now I have had enough time to get familiar with all 3 packs. So let me tell you what my experience has been with these packs since release. Let's start with Renewed History. In my previous video, even before release, I said that this pack felt like a bit of a dark horse to me. At the time, I thought the lack of zone building might make it less useful. But once I actually started using it, I realized that this pack is not really about building entirely new neighborhoods. Instead, it is much more about renovating and refreshing existing ones. If you have a district that feels a bit boring or one that you built a little too roughly in the past, Renewed History is actually a great tool for giving it a fresh look and a new identity. The pack includes 11 unique buildings along with 7 public service buildings. Let's begin with the unique buildings. What can you really use them for? One of their biggest benefits is that they can give a district real character. If an area feels too generic, a well-chosen unique building can instantly define the tone of the whole neighborhood. And honestly, that is a very important urban planning tool. A common mistake, and I make this too, is that when we start building a new district, we simply mark out an area and say, this will be a residential neighborhood. Then we zone it, the buildings grow, and in the end the district works, but it doesn't really have a personality. In many cases, it is actually much easier to create the atmosphere of a district if you start with one defining building and then build a surrounding area around that concept. That defining building could be a university, a library, a city hall, a skyscraper, or even an iconic park. It is much easier to build consciously when you already have a visual and functional anchor point. And the Renewed History packs contains quite a few unique buildings that are perfect for exactly this purpose, setting the tone of a district. It is also worth mentioning that some of the unique buildings in this pack are not just decorative landmarks, they actually have a real function. That hasn't really been typical in the history of City Skylines. Usually unique buildings mostly worked as attractions rather than functional city assets. But Renewed History changes that a little. For example, the pack includes the Central Library, which is actually my personal favorite from the whole pack. Even though you can only build it once in your city, it also works as a real central library. And I think that is a very good direction. I would like to see more unique buildings in the future that are not just visual attractions or maintenance heavy prestige buildings, but that actually serve a purpose in the city as well. I will come back to this point later when I talk about iconic brutalism. If we look at the buildings themselves, the 11 unique buildings are quite diverse. Most of them are skyscrapers, and in fact the office skyscrapers is now the tallest building in the game, rising even higher than the biggest towers from the skyscrapers pack. But there are also educational buildings among the unique buildings. As for the public service buildings, the pack focuses mainly on education. Different elementary schools, high schools, and universities are included, but there is also a hospital and a police station. Note that these buildings have very high capacities. In fact, that is one of the pack's biggest advantages and probably one of its strongest selling points. That can be a very attractive investment in terms of your city budget. For example, you can build an elementary school with a capacity of up to 3,000 students. I even had a city where a single one of these schools could practically handle the educational needs of several districts at once. So when someone buys this pack, they are not just getting spectacular public buildings, but also buildings that are genuinely high capacity and practical. In terms of style, one of the most interesting things about renewed history is that it connects the past and the present. These buildings often look like modern architecture has been built on top of a historic or historicized base. That is why the lower parts often resemble classic buildings made of stone or traditional materials, while the upper parts introduce modern elements like concrete and glass. And that works surprisingly well because these buildings can fit into both historic neighborhoods and modern districts. They add a little extra character without feeling completely out of place. Now let's talk about the parks. There is one iconic element that appears in practically every park in this pack, and I think it really defines the visual identity of renewed history. That is the canopy, or as I like to call it, the honeycomb. It is a column-like structure with a hexagonal honeycomb-style decoration on top. These canopy elements appear in almost every park, but they can also be placed separately as props. That means you can use them in smaller park areas or integrate them into larger custom park complexes. The parks in renewed history also combine old industrial and warehouse-style elements with more modern forms. Warehouses, domes, and the canopy structures all show up here too. And once again, the core concept of the whole pack becomes very clear, the meeting of old and new. While building with these packs, two real-world examples came to my mind. One has Brooklyn in New York, where many neighborhoods have been shaped by the reuse of old industrial areas. The other, staying a bit closer to my home, Hungary, was the Zsolnai Quarter in Pécs, which was also created through the reuse of a former industrial site. And in many ways, renewed history is trying to bring exactly that feeling into your city's skyline cities. The creative reuse of former industrial areas. Overall, I think the pack is well made. My only small criticism is that this warehouse-based concept could perhaps have been developed just a little further. It would have been nice to get more props or standalone building elements that reinforce this visual style. That said, the pack still works quite well in this regard because many of the items that appear in the parks, chairs, tables, canopy objects, and other decorations can also be placed individually as props. So although the pack officially contains 22 props, many of them are essentially reusable pieces taken from the parks themselves. And that still gives the player a lot of freedom. With these props and parks, you can also create more unique spaces in the city, such as an outdoor pub or a custom public plaza. Overall, Renewed History is a versatile pack that clearly brings the idea of industrial reuse or urban renewal into the game. It may not be the most spectacular DLC, but it is definitely worth trying if you want to refresh parts of your city. My rating for Renewed History is 7 out of 10. Now let's move on the next building pack, Iconic Brutalism. As the name suggests, this pack brings brutalist architecture into the world of city skylines. This time, we mainly get public buildings and the selection is actually quite broad. The pack includes a full range of city service buildings, police stations, hospitals, schools, and even an oil-fired power plant and a garbage incinerator. And I think brutalist buildings can really add a lot to the atmosphere of a district because they are the kind of buildings that truly dominate the cityscape. They are massive, distinctive, and almost impossible to ignore visually, which makes them perfect tools for giving a neighborhood a strong identity. The pack also includes several unique buildings that bring this iconic brutalist style into the game very effectively. For me, one of the most positive elements of iconic Brutalism is the addition of 3 new metro stations. What makes this especially interesting is that one of them is based on the real Brutalist metro station from Washington. These metro stations are a great addition and they make it much easier to create a convincing Brutalist atmosphere in your city. The parks are also very well done. There are 3 different parks in the pack. Perhaps the most iconic of them is the Fountain Park, which is a quiet, large and combines a lot of concrete with a lot of water. Another one is circular and greener, while the third follows the concept of an elevated park with a more layered and raised design. Elements like these are great for adding a variety to the city. When you start using space in 3 dimensions instead of building everything flat, the city simply looks much more interesting. However, there is one thing that I think is very clearly missing from this package. The lack of zone buildings didn't really bother me in renewed history, but with iconic Brutalism it is much more noticeable. It would have been fantastic to build a full brutalist housing estate with massive residential blocks in that style. And more generally, it is always nice when City Skylines gets more high-density residential buildings because variety is never a bad thing. Unfortunately, that is something we have to do without here because the pack contains only public buildings, unique buildings, and parks. Overall, though, I do have to say this. I honestly would have been happy to pay 2 or 3 euros more for this pack if it had included zoned brutalist residential buildings and felt like a more complete package. This also connects to a broader point. I think the system of unique buildings in the first City Skylines could really use some rethinking. At the moment, the problem is that these buildings mostly cost money to maintain and don't really generate meaningful income, and in larger cities that becomes a real issue over time. This was handled somewhat differently in City Skylines 2. Their signature buildings often function as real residences, workplaces, or other functional assets, so they are not just beautiful to look at, they also contribute economically to the city, and in a way that is actually quite similar to what the Reco mode already made possible in CS1. Now, I am not saying the unique building system in the first game should be completely redesigned, but I do think a few smaller changes could improve it a lot. For example, these buildings could generate some form of tax revenue. Or since most unique buildings effectively work as tourist attractions, it would also make sense to allow players to charge an entrance fee or ticket price for them. In the longer term, I am also planning a separate video about what kinds of changes could improve City Skylines while still preserving the spirit of the original game. So if you haven't subscribed yet, that alone might be a good reason to do so. But coming back to this pack, overall I think Iconic Brutalism is a good and unique addition. For me, however, the lack of zone buildings is a noticeable drawback, even if the name itself fits the content perfectly. My rating for Iconic Brutalism is 6 out of 10. Finally, let's talk about the add-on that can be considered the first real DLC for City Skylines in quite a long time, Race Day. First, it is worth clarifying the terminology a little. A content creator pack is basically an add-on that mainly introduces new buildings into the game. These can be zone buildings, public service buildings, or unique buildings. A true DLC, on the other hand, adds new gameplay mechanics. And from that perspective, Race Day definitely qualifies as a real DLC. At first, I was a bit surprised to see the original City Skylines getting expanded again. But the more you think about it, the more it actually makes sense. City Skylines has become one of the defining city building games. Today, it stands alongside classics like Transport Tycoon, SimCity 3000 and SimCity 4, and those are the kinds of games that never really go out of style. That is exactly the spirit in which Race Day was created. It brings car races and various city events into the game. As I mentioned in the introduction, this is the sort of gameplay feature that would probably be difficult to implement properly in City Skylines 2 right now. And the reason is simple. During a race or a festival, a huge number of people appear in the city at the same time. That requires significant extra processing power. And if a game already struggles with optimization, as many players have experienced it with City Skylines 2, then a feature like this could easily put even more strain on the system. Now let's look at the construction of the racetrack itself. I won't go through the exact building steps in detail again because I already covered that in the previous video and even broke it down point by point. Instead, I would like to focus here on some of the practical experiences I had while building the track. That matters because the system works in such a way that the race HQ connects the track to the spectator areas. But spectators cannot simply walk across the racetrack. That means the stands usually need to be connected via overpasses or underpasses, and if you don't leave enough room for those during construction, it becomes much harder to create a layout that feels logical and tidy. The other thing you definitely need to keep in mind is that not only the headquarters but also the stands require electricity. And since heavy power lines don't exactly look great next to the race circuit, it is worth using a less intrusive modded power line or simply arranging the stand so they are close enough to each other or to the start area that they can effectively pass power along. Interestingly, even the cameras can help bridge electricity, although only within a fairly small radius. As for the actual track building, it went surprisingly smoothly. So far, I have only drawn relatively simple circuits, but the system also allows you to build bridges and tunnels, and you can even create tracks or more uneven or hilly terrain. The races themselves are also highly customizable. You can set the ticket prices, the number of races, and the number of starters. Of course, the more participants you allow, the more expensive the event becomes to operate, which can also reduce profitability. So I generally try to configure the races in a way that each event would cost somewhere between 25,000 and 50,000 money. The income was still quite good. In several cases, each race generated hundreds of thousands of money in revenue. That said, the effect is not quite as dramatic as when a stadium event suddenly injects a huge lump sum into the city budget. My impression is that race revenue probably arrives more gradually over the duration of the event rather than all at once. And because of that, its impact feels less spectacular than matchday events. Still, it is great to have another type of sporting event that can become part of city life and bring recurring income every year. So it is definitely worth experimenting with different racetrack layouts and trying out the new mechanics. Another important part of the race day add-on is the addition of street running races, cycling races, and parades, which can now be organized directly inside the city. The system works by placing a special event building along a road, which then serves as the starting point, and from there you define the route of the event. So far, I have only created a few of these routes, mostly in suburban areas. There were several reasons for that. On the one hand, I didn't want to disrupt city traffic too heavily. On the other hand, the game does not allow event routes to run through certain public transport infrastructure. For example, if a tram line runs along a road, the game simply will not let you place the event route there. It does, however, work with bus lines. That may seem a little strange at first because in those cases the game can temporarily split bus routes in two. But for trams that would be much more difficult to handle because in the first City Skylines tram system rely on loops, so cutting the route would make them almost impossible to operate properly. According to my experience so far, these street events also seem to generate less revenue than car races, so when organizing them, it is worth being careful not to overspend. Overall, Race Day is a very well made add-on that brings a lot of genuinely new gameplay possibilities to City Skylines 1. What is especially like is that you can finally set the exact date of events and the game actually sticks to it. Of course, I do have a few smaller criticisms. For example, it would have been nice to get some event-related zone buildings that only appear temporarily during race weekends or parades. It also would have been great to see motorcycle racing included. Since I played the Race Day add-on on PC, I fortunately didn't run into the problems that some console players have reported. Those issues will apparently be fixed soon by the developers. Taking everything into account, my rating for the Race Day is 9 out of 10. So to sum it all up, each of these 3 new releases celebrating the 11th anniversary of City Skylines adds something different to the game. Renewed History will probably appeal most to the players who want to refresh their cities and give all their neighborhoods a more modern and creative look. Iconic Brutalism brings a very distinctive architectural style into the game, mainly through its public buildings and civic institutions. Although I still think the pack would have been even stronger with some brutalist residential buildings. And finally, Race Day adds completely new gameplay mechanics to City Skylines, whether through car races, street races, or city parades. These events create new ways to make city life feel more lively and dynamic. Overall, I think these 3 expansions are fitting a way to celebrate 11 years of City Skylines, and they also show that the first game is still capable of growing with new ideas and fresh content. And now I am curious what you think. Which pack interests you the most? Brutalist buildings, urban renewal, or car races and parades? Let me know in the comments and tell me what new features you would still like to see in City Skylines. Thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video.